Scarcity built our civilization, so what happens when it disappears? In a world without want or need, does value vanish or evolve? They say nothing in life is free, but what if everything is? In a recent episode, we explored the idea of post-scarcity and questioned whether the default notion of infinite resources was even a useful way to frame it. As we explore there, it might make more sense to view post-scarcity as a future in which most people no longer suffer anxiety about their needs being met because of sheer availability or abundance of ways to fill a given need. We discussed how post-scarcity isn't a yes-no state, but a wide range of fluid states. A civilization might achieve post-scarcity in some areas, like energy or food, while still struggling with scarcity of housing, status, or meaning. And even when physical needs are met, emotional and social needs often remain far more elusive. So too, these states might not be permanent. A place with an abundance of land might fill it and grow short. To highlight that, we turn to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a framework showing how even a civilization of limitless resources might still struggle to fulfill higher order needs like purpose, belonging, or self-actualization. But today we're diving into a different question. In a world of abundance, what does post-scarcity mean for economics? If goods and services can be produced on demand at almost no cost, and no one is required to work just to survive, how does an economy even function? Do markets still exist? Do we still trade, save, and invest? What becomes of money, property, or wealth? And what replaces price signals and profit incentives when supply is essentially infinite? In short, if everything is free, what happens next? What post-scarcity means economically? To understand the economics of a post-scarcity civilization, we have to begin with a small problem. Economics, as we know it, is built on scarcity. It is, quite literally, the study of how we allocate limited resources to meet unlimited wants. Take away the limits, and you might assume the whole field just vanishes in a puff of logic. But the truth is more complex. As we noted earlier, post-scarcity does not mean utopia. It just means people no longer worry about their basic needs being met. Not a utopia where nothing ever goes wrong, or where luxury flows like wine from fountains, but a society where survival and dignity are no longer uncertain. And importantly, post-scarcity is not a binary switch. It comes in degrees and domains. You can live in a post-scarcity energy economy while still dealing with scarce housing or limited social mobility. And that's the first way economics survives the death of scarcity. Scarcity doesn't actually die, it just changes form. Take energy as an example. Imagine a world where fusion power is abundant, solar energy floods in from power satellites, and electricity costs 1,000th of what it does today. That does not mean electricity is suddenly free. It still has to be transmitted, regulated, stored, and managed. There are still economic trade-offs, even if they're now between different kinds of abundance, like choosing whether to beam solar power to Earth or Mars, or which megacity gets priority when a solar storm knocks the satellite offline. Or consider another classic case, food. In theory, with enough automation and biotechnology, we could create food so abundant and cheap that hunger is a distant memory, but even then, not all food is equal. Not everyone wants nutrient paste from a synthesizer, even if it contains everything you need. People will still value unique meals, cultural dishes, and the human touch of a home-cooked recipe. Economics shifts from managing shortages to navigating preferences, logistics, and social meaning. That's the core twist of post-scarcity economics. Value stops being about what's rare and starts being about what's meaningful. And meaning is subjective, personal, and infinitely diverse. The economy doesn't vanish, it just becomes a lot less about pricing apples and a lot more about managing attention, identity, experience, and fulfillment. It becomes the economics of what matters. Markets may still exist, not simply for trading food or fuel, but for time, attention, reputation, or uniqueness. Even in a world where you can replicate anything, originals still matter. The hand-painted portrait, the genuine article, the first edition, these will remain scarce by definition, and even when physical goods become trivial to replicate, experiences do not. There's only one front row seat at the Supernova Symphony, Only one person can be the first to climb Olympus Mons in spring. So post-scarcity doesn't kill economics, it evolves it, from the management of needs to the negotiation of meaning. Incentives without scarcity. And if survival and scarcity are no longer what drives our decisions, then what does? Let's explore how incentives change when work, wealth, and want are no longer required. For most of history, the primary reason people worked was because they had to. You needed food, shelter, and security, and those came with a price, whether measured in coins, calories, or labor. Even in more modern contexts, money acts as stand-in for survival and status. If your basic needs were already covered and your luxuries available on demand, what would get you out of bed in the morning? Some might say nothing, and that's fine. If work becomes entirely optional, many people might spend their time on hobbies, art, exploration, or leisure. And that sounds idyllic until you remember that not all hobbies are productive, not all leisure is fulfilling, and not everyone's dream is socially healthy. People need challenges. We want purpose. Most of us do not do well in a vacuum of meaning. This is where the post-scarcity economy has to grapple with a central issue. How do you incentivize effort when necessity is gone? What replaces hunger and hardship as the engine of civilization? One possible answer, perhaps ironically, is both ancient and modern: status, passion, and curiosity. People will still strive for excellence, not because they have to, but because they want to. The artist does not sculpt just for a paycheck. The scientist doesn't chase truth just for tenure. I was making this show for 3 years before I opened up a Patreon account or ran any ads. Plenty of people work harder than they need to because it gives them a sense of purpose. They want to matter. They want to win. That drive is not going away, even in a world where nobody's starving and housing grows on trees, or at least pops out of nanofabricators. Of course, we can't assume everyone will pursue noble goals. Some people will chase fame, some will want power, some will grind video games or virtual economies not for fun but for prestige. Others may compete for recognition in art, science, sport, or social media. In a post-scarcity world, attention might become the new currency, and that can lead to a very different kind of economy, one driven by metrics, views, followers, or influence. Call it the algorithmic aristocracy. And there are real risks in that. We may already be seeing them. Social media platforms have already gamified attention, and many people expend enormous effort seeking likes, shares, or subscribers, sometimes to the detriment of their well-being or the morality of their cause or work. If that becomes the primary economy in a post-scarcity future, it could create new forms of inequality, obsession, and exploitation, even without material need. Some of this effort might be voluntary, but not all of it. Distribution, duty, and designed idleness. Of course, even in abundance, things still need to be distributed, and that raises the question of how. Some post-scarcity civilizations might adopt universal basic income models, UBI, not necessarily as literal income, but as a default resource package, a baseline of housing, food, energy, and digital access granted to all. You're on your own after that, and this might be very baseline or very abundant, depending on whether they had a lot to spare or not, or felt that giving too much was harmful to the individual or society even if they could. Others might tie rations or privileges beyond the basics to personal behavior, contribution, or reputation, or even tie the basics into that. In such systems, your access might quietly scale with effort, creativity, or cooperation, not so much out of necessity, but with the intent to maintain social cohesion and discourage stagnation. Some cultures might introduce nominal work weeks. They were only a handful of hours a week, not 40, and not to survive, but to ensure participation. Though it might be needed for survival, too, especially if you're reluctant to go overboard with AI that is fully human-level capable or higher. A few hours of required weekly service, ceremonial or practical, might give citizens a sense of rhythm, identity, connection, and self-worth. Others might partially throttle AI or automation, officially citing fears of runaway intelligence, which may also be legitimate, but unofficially seeking to preserve human purpose and employment. You might work more voluntarily to earn more or keep busy, but might be guaranteed a chance to work at least a little. After all, a world that no longer needs you can feel unsettling. Though for my part, I don't think it would be a lie, and I expect there would be plenty that still needs doing. In cases like this, your economy is still functioning just as now, it's just more focused on earning luxuries, be it by ration or by income, and I expect that would look a lot like now, as our ancestors would probably think that was more or less true of the modern economy. And their economy might be functioning along capitalist lines, or socialist, or communist, or something else. You might be assigned work, or you might go apply for a job with a public or private entity, a for-profit or non-profit. I don't think post-scarcity is inherently limited to any particular economic system, even if some might be better at it or at getting you there. Your mileage may vary on which one is best. Alternatively, some civilizations might adopt a more formalized contribution-based economy. You are not paid simply in money. You are awarded prestige, influence, or access based on your contributions to society. Indeed, this has always been a common currency in a lot of organizations and causes. It just tends to be very informal. Imagine a sort of prestige ledger. The more you help others, create beauty, solve problems, the more you are empowered to direct collective resources, not because you need them, but because others trust you to use them well. I want to emphasize that this does not mean money disappears. We explored that idea in another episode some years back, and in most scenarios it just results in money with a different name. Nor does post-scarcity mean every resource is under public control, only that those which are publicly managed likely won't be auctioned off to the highest bidder. For public projects that cannot be fully automated, you would still need people involved, and you can't just throw cash at unpleasant or high-intensity tasks to fill those roles, because while people probably still have and like money, they mostly don't need it to survive, and that changes what kind of work they're willing to do for anything short of exceptional compensation. Of course, that compensation does not need to be strictly financial. You have to consider what you're incentivizing them with instead, especially when you need individuals who are not only highly capable, but also trustworthy and motivated for the right reasons. As an example, will you take a cream pie to the face or volunteer for a dunking booth to raise money for a charity? This sort of post-scarcity meritocracy has its appeal, but it also has its pitfalls, even ignoring the sort of extremity of self-sacrifice we see in fictional examples like Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. Who decides what counts as a contribution? And does it matter why they did it? Genuine sacrifice, or desire to be seen as more virtuous than others and to gain from that? How do you avoid a tyranny of taste or cultural monoculture where only certain behaviors are rewarded? Incentives, even in abundance, still shape behavior, and badly designed incentives can steer even well-meaning societies into strange places. And that's a good example of where survival incentives can still matter, in a group where no one fears that failure will leave them impoverished or ruined. Some people may hesitate to implement necessary changes or speak up about problems. They might avoid rocking the boat to spare the feelings of someone who is working hard, perhaps passionately so, on a task that either is not needed or is being done poorly despite their efforts. We already see this dynamic in families, volunteer groups, corporate boardrooms, and government agencies. In a post-scarcity setting, we should assume this tendency has the potential to get even worse. So, while the mechanisms of motivation may change, the need for motivation does not vanish. A post-scarcity civilization must still find ways to challenge its citizens, to engage their passions, and to give them room to grow. Because without incentives, even abundance can become a prison. And that brings us to the next big question. If abundance reshapes our incentives, what does it do to ownership itself? In a world where anything can be copied or emulated in virtual reality, where even experiences and memories might be edited for a fee, what does it mean to own something at all? Ownership and property in a post-scarcity economy. What does it mean to own something? This is one of the stranger twists of a post-scarcity civilization. Traditional property, land, goods, commodities, has always been defined by its limits. You own something because someone else does not. If it is infinitely replicable, the very foundation of that ownership gets fuzzy. We move into the realm of copyright and intellectual property. You can still own a chair you printed from your home fabricator, but if anyone can print an identical one instantly, it's not valuable in the same way. We're not talking about knockoffs or inferior copies. These are identical, maybe even atom for atom identical. That's not theft, that's just usage, and it's not scarcity, it's replication without restriction. Which raises the question, what kind of property still matters? Well, a few do. One is location-based property like land or housing. Even if building materials are cheap and replicators are everywhere, physical space remains inherently limited, at least within a given geography or biosphere. So unless you're living in infinite virtual space, or on a planet with unlimited habitable value, real estate still matters. Indeed, this is one of the reasons why we point to space and talk about settling strange new worlds and building immense space habitats. Another is personal identity and creative authorship. You might be able to copy a painting perfectly, but there's still something unique about the original, or about who made it. Authorship, provenance, and narrative value become the new scarcity. You may be paying for books or films, or subscribing for monthly access, or a digital book might be free, but the experience of being the author, or having a signed first edition, still holds meaning, and in many cases the story behind the object becomes more important than the object itself. We are already seeing this with NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, which are often mocked, sometimes with good reason, but they illustrate a real demand for unique digital ownership, not because data itself cannot be copied, but because we care about who owns the official version. It's a signal of taste, participation, or early support. And while blockchain might not be the long-term solution, the underlying concept of digital property probably is not going anywhere. We also might imagine folks valuing the order in which they viewed a piece of art or read a book or wrote a review, as those who demonstrably got on the bandwagon early in some artist or author's life may prize that influential role. I doubt I'm singular as a creator for my tendency to reply more frequently to messages and emails from longtime fans or patrons, but even if I were, the very existence of first edition books and signed copies says there's a pathway for these sorts of options. In virtual worlds or highly networked civilizations, access rights might replace ownership as the key concept. You do not need to own a private shuttle when you can summon one at will. You do not need a private theater when you can access any performance anywhere. But access can still be gated by time, priority, or affiliation. Who gets into the live concert? Who gets first access to a new invention? Who gets to decide what shows up on the skyline? This creates a world where property becomes less about things and more about experiences, control, and prestige. Of course, some post-scarcity civilizations might try to abolish personal property altogether. Everything is shared, everything public. But even then, someone is still deciding what gets shared and how, and that's a form of ownership too, just one that might wear a more democratic or bureaucratic face. We should also consider inheritance. Who inherits land has been a big issue for millennia, and even if most material wealth becomes less relevant, people will still want to pass things down, whether it's property, social capital, reputation, or even genetic or cybernetic enhancements. Grandpa left you his cybernetic army, built by the legendary Dr. Noonien Soon. That's not just science fiction, it's an extension of what we already do. We don't just pass on land or heirlooms, we often try to pass on reputations, networks, and opportunities to our kids or successors. Of course, if we crack biological immortality, there may not be anything left to pass down. But then we run into a different issue. Your heirs may not want to wait a few millennia to inherit the family empire, and might start looking into assassins. Or maybe you're in a civilization with finite resources and nowhere left to expand, and now there are limits on who gets to be born or who gets to be long-lived, and that raises some thorny issues. How do you ensure opportunity remains open when even immortality might be something families pass down? What does meritocracy mean in a world where some people start life with upgrades? In short, ownership doesn't go away in a post-scarcity world, it just changes clothes. From exclusive control over physical goods, to selective access to experiences, to recognition of contribution and creative identity. And perhaps more than ever, the conversation about property becomes a conversation about values. What do we reward? What do we respect? What do we protect from duplication and why? These are not new questions, but in a world without want, they may finally get the attention they deserve. The Star Trek economy and the myth of a moneyless society. Whenever the topic of post-scarcity comes up, someone inevitably says, like Star Trek, right? They don't even have money anymore. It's a fair question and a complicated one, because depending on which episode or film you're watching, the Star Trek universe can't seem to decide whether money is gone, rare, or just not talked about at dinner parties. Captain Picard tells us that humanity has evolved beyond the need for currency, and then we see people gambling at Quark's bar on Deep Space Nine, haggling over transport fees, or using credits for Federation transactions. So which is it? In truth, the Star Trek economy is more of a storytelling shorthand than a working model. It's meant to signal that humanity has grown out of greed, poverty, and class struggle, not that it's solved every logistical problem or abolished all incentives, but as a speculative framework, it gives us a useful starting point. What would an economy look like if survival needs were universally met and traditional money lost much of its power? To begin with, Star Trek assumes the existence of technology so advanced, like replicators, energy to matter conversion, and near unlimited power from antimatter reactors or fusion, that almost anything material can be produced on demand. They also have a very low population during the era of the shows. In canon, they had a lot of nasty wars in the era before that, and the survivors have been prone to smaller families, so they have a lot of elbow room even without warp drive and empty planets. And while real world post-scarcity probably won't give us Earl Grey hot from thin air, it does point to a world where most goods are no longer constrained by manufacturing limits or supply chains. And we have Keurig machines, and soon enough drones or robots who could grab it or brew it from leaves, and maybe even good enough to anticipate when we want one, and with abundancy enough that throwing out the occasional cup because they guessed wrong is no big deal. Needless to say, in such a system, traditional money used to mediate the scarcity of goods and labor starts looking unnecessary. If no one has to pay for housing, food, clothes, or medical care, and if you get a starship because you qualify rather than because you bought one, then currency may begin to fade into the background. That said, I think there'd still be plenty left that people are willing to trade for, whether goods, services, or time. They still want a starship even if they are not the most qualified, to which I imagine we can all empathize. And once people are trading time or effort, you either have money or you have something with another name serving the same purpose. That's the reason we invented cash in the first place. People like something comfortable, fungible, and universally accepted. It's a lot easier than relying on bartering or tracking personal favors, which tends to be time-consuming, inconsistent, and often awkward. Even the absence of cash, though, does not mean incentives vanish. Star Trek officers still strive for excellence, scientists compete for prestige, captains vie for plum assignments and meaningful missions. There are still awards, accolades, and status to earn. What changed is that these incentives are no longer survival-based. You're not trying to eat, you're trying to matter, or do something that will matter, often even at the risk of your survival. Which leads to one of the more interesting implications. In a world where nobody needs to work to live, work becomes about identity and purpose, and that fits what we already discussed. People are pursuing passions, not paychecks. In Star Trek, joining Starfleet isn't about wealth, it's about being part of something meaningful. Advancement isn't rewarded with more stuff, it's rewarded with more responsibility. And again, this is also not a new concept for humanity, but as the need for effort to achieve basic survival decreases, these other motivations take a bigger center stage. Yet even in that world, not everything is equal. Some people get the Enterprise. Some people get assigned to outposts studying gaseous anomalies in the middle of nowhere. And while Earth may be post-scarcity, there are still trade and transactions with other civilizations. Ferengi, for instance, are famously capitalistic, and they are not out of place in that universe. So clearly, even in an allegedly moneyless federation, external economics still matter. What's more, power has not disappeared. The Federation Council still decides what projects get resources. Starfleet decides who gets command. Influence, access, and opportunity still exist, and are still unequally distributed, even if they are not denominated in cash. That's not a bug, that's human behavior. So perhaps the better way to view the Star Trek economy is not as a moneyless system, but as a high-trust, high-abundance society, where the basic needs of citizens are so thoroughly met that most people can't afford to live without thinking about money. And that's not so different from how money works in our own lives. Once your bills are paid and your fridge is full, what you do with your time becomes a different kind of decision. A lot of marketing is built around trying to convince you that some product is vital to your survival, even often attempting to evoke anxiety. A post-scarcity economy might not have those, or it might be the only marketing you see, carefully engineered ads designed to make you upset. That product could be anything from a new medicine or widget to a political candidate, and I'm assuming the Federation still runs elections and has parties and individuals vying to get their message out by any method available. But even in a post-scarcity society, not everyone starts from the same place. And if wealth as we know it changes form, what about the wealth we pass down? What does inheritance look like in an age of abundance? Wealth, inheritance, and intergenerational power. If no one struggles for food or shelter, does inherited wealth become irrelevant? Maybe, but maybe not. Material goods might lose their luster, but prestige, connections, access, and enhancements may not. As we said earlier, even today, families pass on more than money. They pass on names, reputations, social networks, even expectations. In a post-scarcity world, this kind of legacy capital may become even more influential. Maybe your grandparents didn't leave you a house, but they did leave you a digital legacy, a following, or access to curated experiences or restricted archives. Or maybe they left you their biotech upgrade package or neural implant suite. Grandpa's antique cyberbrain is now retro chic. He also left you his interstellar freighter, currently 12 light years away and under legal dispute. If biological immortality becomes common, inheritance changes shape again. You may not inherit a fortune. You might inherit a multi-millennial waiting list to take over a role someone never retires from. Dynasties become something stranger, not passing power from generation to generation, but hoarding it indefinitely unless society finds a way to limit tenure, mandate turnover, or incentivize transitions. In this way, abundance might not erase inequality, it might ossify it, not through hoarding gold, but through monopolies on opportunity, memory, or time itself. The senator for your state is in his 50th term, the professors at your university in tenure for 5 centuries, and while both may be exceptionally good from experience and connections, some may not be terribly active or productive anymore, except at maintaining their position, and for experts, that may mean not sharing new discoveries or edges, so they retain their elite edge. What if the key to unlocking a post-scarcity civilization, where everything is essentially free, starts with flinging moon rocks? In our latest Nebula exclusive, Mass Drivers on the Moon, we explore how electromagnetic catapults could turn the moon into humanity's first cosmic freight terminal, launching millions of tons of material to build habitats, power stations, and megastructures that might finally break the chains of scarcity. And while we're talking about big ideas, 17 Pages, our gripping new Nebula original documentary, dives into one of science's most controversial moments, the so-called scientific Watergate. With congressional footage and fresh interviews, it's a reminder of how bias and politics shape even our deepest truths. You can watch Mass Drivers on the Moon, 17 Pages, and every SFIA episode early, ad-free, on Nebula. Get a lifetime membership for just $300 and unlock everything forever. Or go annual for $36, a full 40% off. Head to go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur to join us and watch 17 Pages. Just head to go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur. Upward mobility and inequality. As we explored earlier, when attention and recognition become the new currency, the games of status do not end, they intensify. Even in a world without hunger or rent, people will still compare, and when everyone has access to abundance, what separates the exceptional from the average might not be what they have, but how they are seen. Upward mobility may become less about climbing an economic ladder and more about finding and claiming meaningful roles. But there are only so many admiral ships, public monuments, or viral video spots to go around. The scarcity of status becomes more glaring, not less. Automation might ease the load, but it cannot or should not replace everything. Leadership, artistry, mentorship, and innovation are human endeavors, or at least they remain so until we decide whether AI should join us at the top. If we start outsourcing our great ideas, dreams, and decisions, the question of who gets credit or gets remembered may be the last status game left. Economic failure modes in post-scarcity. Post-scarcity may eliminate hunger and poverty, but it doesn't automatically eliminate dysfunction. One possible failure mode is post-abundance apathy. When everything essential is guaranteed, some civilizations may drift into cultural stagnation. Without hardship to overcome or stakes to challenge us, people might fall into hedonism, nihilism, or simply inertia, not because they are satisfied, but because they are unmoored. They may stop striving, not out of contentment, but because nothing calls them to greatness. Another risk is the illusion of scarcity. In a world of plenty, some individuals or institutions might deliberately hoard, gatekeep, or manipulate resources, not because they need to, but because controlling access grants them power. Experiences, opportunities, or social standing might be artificially limited to maintain hierarchies, even if material scarcity no longer justifies them. Then there is the tyranny of optimization, systems so focused on efficiency, fairness, or social harmony that they start suppressing deviation, creativity, or dissent. After all, when you can model every outcome, the temptation to preemptively steer behavior for the greater good can lead to soft totalitarianism, even in a world where nobody's hungry. In short, abundance can create new traps, especially when the old survival pressures that force cooperation, innovation, and accountability are gone. Where economics still matters. So is economics obsolete in a post-scarcity universe? Hardly. Even with infinite replicators, some things remain fundamentally scarce: space, time, energy, bandwidth, attention, identity, and meaning. A colony might have all the material it needs, but still need to decide who gets the prime real estate, best instruments, or bandwidth for a deep space telescope, and time may be the most unforgiving of all of them. It's not just that reaching a distant colony world might take centuries, it's that you cannot replicate a moment, relive a childhood, or fabricate a first impression. Not yet, anyway. And of course, not every civilization will be post-scarcity. There may be entire galactic trade networks between haves and have-nots, with tension, diplomacy, and exchange shaping the flow of ideas and resources. A world that can make anything may still need something another culture discovered, invented, or protected, or at least believe it does. And then there's coordination. Logistics don't vanish just because costs do. Someone still has to decide what gets built, when, and for whom. Even with infinite resources, you still need priorities. Planning and allocation, whether through councils, AI-driven systems, or community consensus, remains a fundamentally economic challenge, and need for maintenance doesn't vanish either. Someone has to repair the robots, monitor the infrastructure, and make judgment calls when the unexpected happens. Even in paradise, someone has to keep the lights on. And keep in mind, when we look at examples of that being done by truly intelligent AI, like Commander Data from Star Trek, or the Minds from E&M Bank's cultural series, you have effectively made them people, so unless they're your slaves or brainwashed dupes, they need incentive or compensation for their work too. Moreover, scarcity built on finite resources can only last so long and spread so wide. For many centuries to come, we should be able to grow like wildfire and still have abundance, but at some point you have to manage that scarcity as it returns, and you need to grow your way wisely into that period of abundance where we might have Kardashev 2-level resources with a population not much bigger than now. So economics does not end, it evolves from managing scarcity to orchestrating genuine abundance. The infinite price of a meaningful life. In the end, a post-scarcity civilization does not escape economics, it redefines it. It becomes less about counting coins and more about counting what counts: attention, reputation, purpose, and fulfillment. The economics of identity, of contribution, of what we choose to create when we no longer have to. In a world where gold can be conjured from sunlight and homes built by machine, people will still ask, what should I do? What should we build? Who do I want to be? We may not approve of their answers, but they will still ask them and answer them. In the end, we may master matter and energy, but the question of what matters most will always be ours to answer. You may not need money to live, but you still need meaning to thrive. And meaning in any age is earned, not given.